Okay, then the next thing I want to talk about is executive session. All right. I get a lot of questions from sessions that are worried about whether people can see their minutes, right? For a whole series of different reasons. My nursery school director wants to see my minutes. The person running our prison ministry program for the church wants to see our minutes. The members of the congregation, I've got all of these this year, seriously. A member of the congregation is asked to see our minutes. One group after another, and they're worried because there are things in the minutes that they think should not become public. All right? These can include personnel issues. These can include disciplinary matters that have come up. This can include a wide range of settings of biddings for a piece of property. So the session decides that they're willing to go up to $500,000 to buy this piece of property, but they don't want the person who's actually selling the property to know what the bidding is. I mean, a whole series of different reasons that there could be there, all right? So they want to keep it confidential, all right? Robert's Rules provides a great way around this. And you should, if you don't have a copy of Robert's Rules, you should get one. You can get them online forms, or you can get a hard copy of it, a nice little fat book. 11th edition is the one you should be using. Robert's Rules provides a great way around it. It is called executive session. And this is a meeting or a portion of a meeting whose proceedings are secret. All right? So, while most of the session meetings in congregations are open meetings, an executive session meeting is a closed meeting. Generally, only the members of session, along with officers, such as the moderator and the clerk of session, if they're not currently sitting on the session, remain in the room. Session can allow invited guests to stay in if they so choose. That's uncommon, but you could do it if you really need somebody there. But generally, the guests are only there to share information and then to leave. The bulk of the deliberations happen with just that group in the room. And the proceedings of the session are confidential. No one is supposed to talk to anyone later about what happened in that meeting. All right? Anyone who violates that confidentiality is subject to disciplinary action. So it's secretive, confidential in that way. And if there are documents or other materials that are distributed during that executive session, those documents should be destroyed, shredded or otherwise destroyed at the end of an executive session. You gather back the material and you shred it. You do not let it walk out of the room with session members at the end of the executive session. All right? So if everything is kept there, everybody with me so far? So that nothing stands a chance of getting out in that way, as long as you have people who understand how the confidentiality works. So how do you do this? How do you go into executive session? A motion is made and seconded to go into executive session. All right? You then debate, if you need to, the motion. Well, why do we need executive session? Why don't we keep everybody here? Or why can't this go into the regular minutes? Or whatever debate you need to have. You then vote. A majority of the members must approve the executive session. All right? Once you've done that, you're all set to go into executive session. You move into executive session. You politely ask anyone else who's in the room to please leave. You come get them when the executive session is over, etc., right? So that's how you start. Here's for clerks what you need to be aware of. Minutes must be taken in the executive session. Right? You're going, but wait, you just said that this was confidential, right? Right? So they must be kept in a different place from regular minutes, because only those in the executive session are allowed to see them. Right? So the question came up about somebody approving minutes that they hadn't seen before. If you have a session member who wasn't in the executive session, comes in late, or wasn't at that meeting, can they see the executive session minutes? No, they may not, even though they're on the session. Only those who actually were present there may see them. All right? The exception to that is the minutes must be made available during what we're going to do this afternoon, the annual minute review, if you've done that, or if the presbytery requests to see them. All right? Otherwise, so if you would put them at the back, for instance, of your minute book, if you had executive session minutes, you'd stick them at the back of it when you came in today for this year's review, if you had had them.
And they would be permanently kept?
No, they're not permanently kept there. They go back into some confidential locked folder that is clear, the session knows where they're kept, and that you would turn over to the next clerk. But they are not kept in the regular minute books. So question 1, 2, 3.
Can the session conduct official session business during?
We're going to talk about that. The answer is yes. Are you saying can they make a motion?
Can they conduct actual?
They can. They can. Votes, you sort of jumped ahead of me, but votes may be taken. That's the next line. All right?
I'm just curious how this differs, because I'm a Board of Education clerk as well.
Right.
Regular life.
Okay.
So in exec session, there's no board business cannot take place.
It can take place, but, and you see the but that we have that's there, right? It's not transparent. All right? And as soon as you have motions, or we're not able to talk about this motion, we made a motion, but we can't share that with you, it's not a great idea for a congregation. So generally, what sessions find it easier to do is not to pass motions during executive session. Instead, discuss the issue, everything that you think people shouldn't hear in executive session, work out what the motion would be that everybody is going to be comfortable with, and then go out of executive session, and at that point, with no discussion, immediately pass the motion. All right? The action then is public, but the reasons for getting to it are private. And I'm guessing that's what boards of education do as well, right? That's the smarter way to do it. So that was question 1. Now, question 2 is Billy Zoa.
If I have one of these meetings that's that sensitive and that hush-hush, and I bring it here and somebody here that I do not know.
No, you didn't hear. I said it has to be back there so that people can see that they're back there. They're not going to read them.
They're not going to read it.
Right. Right. You're going to say, so when they're reading along and they see in their minutes, the session went into executive session, they will flip to the back and there will be, I don't care if it's a manila folder or what, that says executive session. They will pull it out, see the title at the date, and put it back in. So that it's clear you've got something, but it's not going to be read by other people. Brian.
I mean, just curious about the process. So the executive session minutes are taken, they're stashed away somewhere. Let's say everybody dies. Who sees that? And what's the purpose behind it? And then secondly, I mean, as you pointed out here, discussions should go in the executive session and then go back to the public and make a motion. Within the last meeting, you said, don't put any details.
Right.
It kind of seems pointless, as long as you don't record the discussion. Hey,
So,
this person's stupid, whatever. But then at the end, you make that final motion.
I'll give you the example. Can I use Jonah? Can I use you as an example for a minute? Can I use Jonah for a minute? Something that I know is not true. Let me start with that. I want to do a disclaimer. I know this is not true before I use it. But since I've got it's either Jonah or Jeremy, because I've got to use a minister as an example. Somebody comes to your session and says, Jonah has been absconding with all the funds in the church privately. He has taken $500,000 out of the funds. All right? You want to discuss that in detail, and what are you going to do about it? All right. And meanwhile, pick on Jeremy too. And Heather gets for Jeremy, he gets and he has been stealing. He has been taking little by little all of the communion ware and all the other stuff out of the property. It's little by little is stealing it. All right. So you've got these problems. You don't want to have that conversation probably in your session minutes, right? It's not the greatest thing. Well, let's begin to have a treasurer look at what Jonah's doing and how is he spending his money. Why did he buy that new car? And you know the trip that he's got, you don't want that in your minutes. So you're going to move into executive session. But you want some documentation somewhere that you actually did something about this, that you didn't just ignore it. And so that's what your executive minutes or session minutes are giving you. Why does the presbytery have access to it? Because at the end of it, you find out Jonah, it wasn't 500,000, it was 2 million that he's absconded with. All right? And now you want to fire him for doing this. All right? And so you come to the presbytery and say, we want to end this call. Why do you want to end the call? Well, because he's done something. I don't see anything in your minutes that says why you want to end the call. Well, we have this other documentation, and he's saying I didn't do anything. And we have a PJC case. And at that point, we may need the minutes. So that's where the problem comes. It would give you proof to litigate. But in most cases, those minutes are going to go absolutely nowhere. Jeremy's stealing. So Jeremy's he's stolen the picture. It turns out that's all he's taken because he really likes it. He wants it at home for his kids. All right. So his daughter loves this picture, and so it turns out. So the decision of their session is quietly we're going to have Heather ask him to give it back and not tell anybody. Right. We don't want that in the minutes. All right. So that goes into an executive session somewhere. If Jeremy continues to steal other things, however, you want a pattern that down the road this has been treated. You see where they might be valuable? Yeah.
But the motion for to go into executive session is in the normal minutes.
Yes.
How in that case would you word that motion?
A motion was made to go into executive session. It was moved, seconded, and approved.
So there'd be no details as to
Yep.
why? Okay.
Don't need any details.
Not just executive session minutes, but regular session minutes are legal documents, and they all can end up in a court of law.
Correct. Right. Regular session minutes could. And that's again, if I don't want this all here, I want them in executive minutes.
Just in regard to going in and out of executive session in both sets of minutes, do you need to indicate the time?
Yes. We went into executive session at 8:15. We came out of executive session at 8:23. A motion was made, blah, 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 blah.
What if the session wanted to talk about, let's say Jeremy, the minister, stole something and we want a session to talk about that, but without the minister there, the moderator there. Can you go into executive session and say,
Without a moderator?
without the moderator?
The answer is yes and no. If it's for a few minutes in a meeting, the same way that, for instance, when you pass the clergy in a congregational meeting, when you pass the clergy salary, generally the clergy person sort of says, I'll be right back, and leaves for the moment while the vote is going on for that, right? Even though they're moderating the meeting, you can have something similar like that. You could have a problem if Jeremy says, I don't care, Heather, I'm not leaving that room. I refuse to leave no matter what. You can't force him to leave, in which case your next call is going to be to COM to say, we've got this problem, will you bring somebody else in to moderate this meeting? But most times, if the clergy person has any interest in continuing with that congregation, Jeremy and Jonah will leave for that time.
So if you have this separate set of minutes for the executive session, I'm assuming you'd put it in something that would be sealed. So would you want to identify it by the date? Or?
Yeah, at the top, you're going to have you're going to have the executive session of however you're going to do it. You seal the envelope and sign it, or you will put it in a locked, like I have PJC cases that nobody can see that I keep in a locked case. If the presbytery went into executive session, I would put my minutes in there, or Wendy and I would both put minutes in the locked cases.
You want it identified some way,
Right.
in case you have more than one.
Right. You need to, and on the actual minutes that you're going to do for your actual minutes for the executive session, it's going to have the same format as your regular minutes. So we'll have the date and time and place, and then when you started executive session, and then you will be signing it at the end the same way. So same as regular minutes. It just will not be in your minute book. It's a way so that you don't need, so all the congregations that have called me and said, I don't want people to see our minutes because there's all this confidential stuff, this is your way around it. Now, it doesn't mean that every decision of your congregation should be an executive session, right? Most of it should be things that your congregation can see, but your minutes should be things that you wouldn't be embarrassed to have your congregation see.
Can you have an executive session without the clerk objection?
Is the clerk the person who is the reason for the executive session? So You, Joyce, decide instead you really like the communion ware, right? And so you've taken it, and so your session decides we need to talk about Joyce taking the communion ware home because she's doing communion at home using this instead of doing it at the church. All right? So the answer would be, Joyce, we need you to step out of the room. You will appoint so-and-so as clerk pro tem, and they will do the executive session minutes. And when you come back in, and then you record the motion and so forth at that point. And your minutes would show the clerk was stepped out and the so-and-so became clerk pro tem.
So what if the motion is to call the police to investigate Joyce's theft? You can put that in your minutes?
You put that in you would at that point, I guess. So you might not ask her to step back yet. You could ask her, in which case the clerk pro tem would take over the regular minute taking at that point as well. Because assuming that the police will have come before you approve those minutes the next time.
That's going to be in your public minutes.
Right. It would be. The motion needs to be in the public minutes. Whatever the action is, it needs to be in the public minutes. But the discussion, so the motion might be, for instance, for Jeremy, the motion is that Heather talked to Jeremy about a problem that's come up. All right, and years later, I will give you an example from my former congregation, and then maybe my former clerk of session is sitting here, so I don't know if it's something Mark knows. But when I was a child in the congregation that I eventually ended up serving, one of our ministers ended up disappearing quickly. He was told one day, apparently, that he didn't have a job the next day. And we have no idea, as children in that congregation, why. And I went to the people and said, what happened to Reverend so-and-so? And the answer was, he smoked a cigar in the kitchen. And we didn't like the smell of cigar smoke. Like, that really, you don't fire someone for that. So when I ended up coming back to this church 30 some odd years later, I decided, well, I'm finally going to be able to solve the mystery. What happened to this person, right? There is absolutely nothing in the minutes about it. They go into executive session twice. I have no idea. All I know is the motion was to ask this minister to leave. That was what's in the minute. All right. So it protects this person who went on and had a great job other places and good career doing other things, and from what I can tell, became a wonderful minister elsewhere. Protects them from, and maybe it was a cigar, how do I know? But it gives you an example of how you're both protecting the privacy of the people involved, not making the congregation aware of the problems to the extent that they all need to get very upset right away. You're dealing with it, but you're also having the conversation that you need to have. So it's a really wonderful tool to use sparingly, all right? Sparingly, all right? That is the clue that goes with this. What your session minutes would note on this is the time you go into executive session, the general reason for doing so. We need to discuss a personnel issue. We need to discuss a financial issue. Jonah's would be financial. Yours would be worship and personnel. I don't know. The time the session came back out of the executive session. All right? With electronic meetings. How many of you do electronic meetings of your session? Where you meet by Zoom or GoToMeeting or other things like that rather than face-to-face. The reality is with electronic meetings, it doesn't work well. You should probably not be doing executive sessions in an electronic meeting, even if your bylaws would allow it. There's nothing that would stop it. But there's no way of knowing that the privacy and confidentiality of those meetings is going to be kept electronically. I could be hitting record on my computer and recording everything that's going on in that session meeting. So if you meet in that way, please do not use this as a technique for electronic meetings. All right? And as we see more and more congregations moving towards electronic meetings, if weather's bad and other things, because it's much less expensive than it used to be to do, it's really important to know that if you're going to have this kind of issue, it needs to be in a face-to-face meeting. How do you approve executive session meetings? All right. When it's time to approve the minutes, question on this, or?
Well, just flip back.
Okay.
Minutes of the executive session can only be approved in executive session.
Right, that's exactly right. The body must go into executive session. That's where I was going. A second time to approve it. That's exactly right. All right, and it should only be the people who were at that executive session meeting, right? You don't, other people would need to leave the room for the moment to approve it. So this is a great technique. It's a way around worrying about confidentiality in a session meeting and having that confidential information in your session minutes, but you should use it as infrequently as you possible. All right? Because transparency really is the ideal. You're representing your congregation by sitting on session. They need to know what's going on. You don't want to have a congregation thinking that your session is going behind their backs. It's not a good thing to be doing. So, if there are no observers in the room, right, and there's just the session sitting there, which in my experience is the case in a lot of session meetings, if not most of them, right? I don't know how many of you have hundreds of people who come into your session meetings on a regular basis, just banging down the door, right? If you don't, a formal executive session meeting may not be needed. Right? If it's not, the clerk simply needs to be careful about what goes into the minutes. Right? All motions get recorded. Other things you're discussing don't. So if it's the Heather will speak to Jeremy motion, that's all that goes into that minute. Right? If it's the we're going to look at Jonah's expenses and where he's getting his money, that's what goes into the minutes. The rest of it doesn't, and you don't need to go into executive session. Right? Only if there are other people that are there.
Like in the case of theft or misappropriation, could you just word it that an item of Treasury there's been a report of inconsistencies, and so will follow up to find out where the
Yes.
That kind of.
Yes, and then if there are more inconsistencies, at that point you may want to document it by going the next time into executive session. Okay. All right, but short of that, if it's not something, if you can have the whole discussion without needing a documentation because you think you're going to need it for a court, for instance, without it, just all that needs to be in your minutes are the motions. That's the only requirement. Yeah?
But if it's a sensitive item, wouldn't you recommend doing it in ES anyway? Because should there be follow-up inquiries from any members of the congregation, say, we read the minutes of that session meeting and say, hey, can you tell me about what this was? If the other session members can't say, I can't discuss that, we were in executive session, puts them in a difficult position.
Yes, and you have to think about it. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. And it's going to depend. If you say, I can't discuss that, and it's too, well, there's something really bad happened. So if it's Jeremy stealing the pitcher, right?
Even though you have just your original
it may be easy
there, and you don't need to excuse anybody else, if it is a sensitive issue, it might be wise to put
right, it depends on. So I use two extremely different situations. And my answer would be that in the situation with Jeremy, for instance, I probably would try to handle that without needing to go into executive session unless there are other people there. The answer is Heather will talk to Jeremy, motion have Heather talk to Jeremy about something connected with worship or communion. That sounds innocent enough. And somebody, what did you talk to Jeremy about? Oh, about what kind of things we keep on the table for communion. Yeah. Not saying that we told her to bring it back. Jonah, on the other hand, there I might go into executive session anyway, because when we're talking about, well, I thought it was 5,000, 100,000, but it's 2 million. That probably you don't want, no matter how that motion is made, you don't want the conversation there. So that might make more sense. And you probably want a legal record of what you've done to show that you're doing due diligence and dealing with the situation. So you need to think about when. The reality is the average person sitting around the session table is not going to know about executive session. You have several choices. When you do your session education, you can educate them in that, and that would be your role, or you with the pastor, although a lot of pastors don't know how to do this either. Or you can be the one to suggest it when it seems appropriate. I'd like to suggest we go into, what's that? Well, it's when and you explain what it is. Right? But it's something that is a good thing to just keep in mind so that you don't get to the situation where you're hysterically worried that your session minutes are going to be looked at by somebody. and that there'll be a problem with them. Yeah?
Susan, so if you don't have a pastor and somebody from the outside is moderating, when you go into executive session, do you ask that moderator?
Yes, they're still moderating because it doesn't have to do with them. But they're also under the same confidentiality. So let's say you have a retired minister or a commission ruling elder or that's moderating. If they violate confidentiality, they can be brought up on disciplinary charges on the PJC. And so, I mean, the fact that that's the case in an executive session is really enough to get almost anybody to keep confidentiality, especially teaching elders. I mean, if I say, so Heather violates confidentiality on it, she's going to be brought up before her session. That might have some value, but maybe not. She's sort of smiling, like, yeah, go ahead and try it. Right? But if it's a teaching elder, if it's Jeremy that violates confidentiality, he knows he's going before a PJC and he may lose his ordination for it. So it's less of a problem from somebody coming in who's in that sort of capacity than it is impressing on your own your own session members that they're not to share anything. Other questions on executive session?